Dr. June Frances Slee passed away at Harbourview Rest Home, where she resided for about a year on the 14th of November 2025. Good afternoon. My name is Rowena Hutton, and it is a privilege to be taking June's service. Our family knew June from when John Hutton and I farmed at Otakike, where we passed June's home on Doctors Creek Road daily. And I must add that many a stimulating chat was had when we came across June out walking. On behalf of June's family, I welcome you today. Many of you will have travelled large distances, and for those that can't be here, we welcome you via live stream. June was one of 7 siblings. Her older sisters, Marion, Rosemary, and brother Sid, followed by Roger, Max, and Jim. I offer my condolences to you and your partners. June was also a loved auntie to her nieces and nephews and friend to many. The death notice in the ODTs had a special sister and auntie that says it all. I sincerely offer my condolences to everyone. To lose a family member and friend is indeed sad. It takes a bit of getting our head around the loss and leaves a gap in our lives. However, it is important for June's family that today is one of celebration. Today is an opportunity for us to appreciate all that June has done, also the many people that she has helped, and how much of a mark her presence has made on those that she connected with across the seas as she travelled and whilst working in both Australia and New Zealand as well as her beloved family. The good old country-style childhood that June had, within a large family growing up in rural Hedgehope, resulted in her having a very stoic and resilient style for living life. She just got on with things. Of course, life, as with us all, has had its challenges, but this just seemed to have made June all the more determined to box on, being pretty staunch and independent with her no-nonsense way of being and dealing with things. June's life, it is clear, has been one of giving of her skills and knowledge to many with her teaching, lecturing and writing. It has indeed been one of colour and variety, as she loved absorbing local and world news, deciphering it to make sense for herself and then relaying it to others. As Roger and I were discussing the service, he said, June always had an opinion. If there was something bugging her, which we know there would be with her very high-profile public life she led, then that was the topic on her mind for quite a while, and if you were around, you would certainly hear about it. All I can add is, what a quick mind she had, such an intelligent woman, and wow, her opinions made you sit up and think. One of her joys was being amongst local politics, and she had a passion for doing right and being an advocate for those that needed support. It takes a very special person to work in this field. June was that person. I have an Oamaru Mail article dated the 21st of December 2013 announcing that Otakaik author Dr. June Slee, a former senior lecturer at Darwin University, said she had previously been invited to stand for the council by people in both the Ahuriri and Corriedale wards, but at that time she'd been travelling to Tasmania to research her book for 10 weeks and would have been overseas during the elections. However, on her return, found that nobody had stood for Ahuriri, and she was approached again. She was looking forward to re-entering local body politics after formerly sitting in as Environment Canterbury councillor as a representative for Waitaki from 2004 to 2007. June was quoted in this article as saying, "I imagine, as usual, plenty of challenges about the management of water. I'm sure you'll agree, not a lot has changed." She went on to say that although she'd been elected by the people of Ahuriri, she was looking forward to representing the whole district. June always went over and above. Roger said how very busy she was during this period of her life. It was a full-on time, and I'm sure you would agree that one of June's strengths of being able to read and recollect what she'd read with tremendous precision would have been such an asset to the district in her role. June adored her animals and always had a dog. Of course, I only remember the Otakaik one, which was wonderful company and great to get June out and about walking. So Roger was telling me she always had a dog, and as only a brother could get away with, he said they were all poorly behaved. I must say I laughed and said, yes, only a farmer could say that, as I don't think June would have been using farmer language to keep her dog in line. In her retirement at 60 years of age, creating a cosy home, first of all at Otakaik, was June's main focus, always with her beloved books around her. There would be sheets of paper with pens at the ready for her next inspirational thoughts, and newspapers also. She moved to Meraki about 4 years ago and absolutely loved it there. She enjoyed talking to the tourists as she was out walking, and she soaked up the peaceful seaside vibe. Neighbours would keep a bit of an eye on her, and she would love the chats. My most recent memories are of popping in to see June at Meraki, and I usually found her on the sofa books around her, notes in progress on the coffee table. Last visit, she was working on her latest book, which I think Roger worked out was about number 6. Writing and being an author was a big part of who June was. I read a review of her book, Crime, Punishment and Redemption, dated the 13th of April 2015 by Professor Alison Elliott. It was highly interesting, but as we've got a video today from Alison, I will let her talk more about that. On another topic, I read an article on the Journal of Lymphedema, dated 2013, as June had a misdiagnosed health issue for 30 years, which resulted in unhelpful treatments. When she researched her issues and consequently was correctly diagnosed, the very detailed and heartfelt article she wrote will no doubt have enlightened many, including, hopefully, the medical professionals. And in the same year, she launched her book, Bloody Friday Revisited, which were recollections of the 1978 Southland Farmers' protest. She spoke to the crowd at an event which she, her brother Sid and others organised, where her book was launched, and is quoted as saying, "You had mortgages, you had families, and you couldn't get your stock killed. It's absolutely worth getting it right and writing it down." Another article I came upon was Classroom Management, Creating Positive Learning Environments, which had such a common sense, was just such common sense. Such diverse subjects, such an intelligent woman. And now I'd like to invite Roger to come forward to share a eulogy and some personal reflections on his sister June.
Well, thank you, Rowena, for those kind words about June. And good to see you all here. Some of you come a long way, as Rowena says. I says, some of you came by flying machines and others by motor car. They came from near and far. They came by flying machines and they came by motor car. Rowena's already said quite a bit of what I was going to talk about, so that doesn't matter. I just wanted to give you a brief walk up through June's life. June, 1 and 7, and she's a middle child, but she didn't suffer the middle child syndrome. Dad spoiled her rotten. Of course, June would deny that, but 6-1 vote would confirm it. June was born in Winton, 28th of September 1945, and June got away to a really rough start in life. She was born with her feet round the wrong way, and they put little splints on to train them back, and according to my dad, of course this is before my time, it was a traumatic time for all. But anyway, June didn't let that hold her back too much. She liked to swim and she liked to play tennis. She was brave and would give anything a try. We lived at Winton, until 1954. And we moved to Headchope then. I thought we were going halfway across the world, but it's only 15 miles. But that's when I started to remember things. I was about 6 at that stage, or was 6, and we all went to Headchope Primary School. Her teacher was a bloke called Frank Shepherd, and he was a passionate historian and one for history, this old Frank Shepherd bloke, seemingly. He got on well with June, but he was posted to Headchope. He liked to drink. He was posted to Headchope, seemingly, because there's no pub in Headchope. So he'd hitch a ride out to Brown's for a drink. And one day, our father, was bringing him home. And he said to my dad, he said, "Oh, that girl, she's got brains, she's going to do things, she's going to go places. But the boy, no brains at all, there's no hope for him." So I don't know whether he's talking about Sel or me, but maybe he's right in both times. But June did go on to become Dux or Head Shape School, way back, in Standard 6. And that same year, she entered into a radio quiz called Uncle Clary, and some old Southlanders will remember that. It was on the radio. I think it was only South and Wide. It might have, I'm not too sure, but someone might be able to help me with that. But anyway, she cleaned up there too. We're all crowding around the radio listening, and yeah, Big June was coming up puffing and answering the questions. Pretty good. On to James Hargest. Kate will share more about that. She left school, worked, studied, trained as a teacher, taught for a few years and went off to Australia teaching. She got into special needs teaching, kids with learning problems, behaviour, things like that. And she studied at university in Australia and got a PhD. Very proud she was of her PhD. Her mum was too. I didn't even know what a PhD was. I was quite ho-hum about the whole thing. But June was a great traveller, and maybe because of all the reading, she's a great reader too. June had a travel bug. She took every opportunity to travel in holidays, between jobs, during time off, any time Big June would be away. She sort of started by exploring the UK, Europe, Middle East, Far East. Not all at once, of course, many different trips. This in the 70s and 80s, might have even been in the 60s. But she went to places that you wouldn't or couldn't get to nowadays because of political issues. Along the Suez in North Africa, they're pretty hot spots at the moment. You probably wouldn't want to go there, even if you could. And Mum accompanied June on some of these trips, and June always said Mum was a good traveller. Mum would sit the hard seat all night long, wouldn't complain or anything. June went into China. Mum went with her on one of her trips too. It was way back in the days when the borders weren't really open, but she, somehow or other, she got there. We had an old relation called Rui Ali, his mum's cousin, and he survived China right through the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. I lost my place in my notes. And he made a great fuss anyway of June, and they went many places in China. So June saw China way back when everyone wore mouse suits and there was no Europeans in China hardly at all. June went to places where they'd come up and touch her, blonde hair and white skin. They'd never ever seen it. So she had planned on writing another book, one she's working on now, which hasn't been finished, Letters from Rui, because she kept on writing to Rui after her visits there, and she stuck a letter somewhere that don't know where they are, but I guess they're history now. June retired at 60, as you do in Australia, came back to live at Otikike, near Kurrell, and got involved in local politics. Don't see him. Mark, you here somewhere? Oh, yeah, there you are, yeah. Mark and Janie are going to come and tell us about that one. But she went back to Darwin University lecturing. They wanted her back up there to do a lecture. Well, did for about 3 years. June was the glue in our family. She kept us together. Of course, as you age and you have families of your own and you get scattered to the four corners, you sort of tend to lose touch within the families. But June thought up this idea and made it up that every significant birthday, that meant on 60, 65, 70, 75, that we all had to get together to celebrate. And one of us was always doing that. So we had all these good times, and got to thank Sid and Heather, because most of them are at Tiana at their house, so great facility there for it. But they They were quite significant. June would do everything. She would find out whose birthday it was for the start of, organise the program, the food, decide the invitation card, and tell us we had to be there. No excuses. We had to be there. They were all good. These times were all good, and we all agreed that it was better to do it while we're all still alive rather than waiting for a funeral for the family to get together. Here we are now. We would have celebrated June's 80th birthday this past September. Poor old June didn't make it. So this is a celebration of June's life, and we're not to be sad. Writing was one of June's greatest passions. She has had 5 books published, mostly to do with things about her work. During the past 2 decades, she's researched and wrote about Nisbet. He was a surgeon superintendent on convict ships that transported convict boys to Tasmania. This being in the early 1800s. Nisbet thought these boys were not bad. They just needed treated more humanely. Hygiene, food, education. And he made himself famous way back those days for the attitude he took. And June was going to write about it. She travelled to Tasmania many times, also to England in search of his records. This was a huge task. And when we packed up June's house, her contents was boxes and boxes of handwritten notes, photocopies, old legal documents, all sorts of stuff. Boxes and boxes of it. It was amazing. But she was determined to have the dates, facts and everything correct. Near enough wasn't good enough for June. Once again, poor June, like so many dementia sufferers, could not admit she was ill. I managed to convince her to move to a village in Lincoln. She hated it and let everyone know about it. I thought it was ideal, but she had made up her mind that she didn't like it. And once June makes up her mind, there's no changing it. Looking back, this was obviously the beginning of her dementia journey. She moved to Meraki and was very happy there. Seaside locations suited June fine. She loved those and enjoyed the interaction with friendly locals. People watched over her as her health declined. We're very grateful to the Meraki community for that. Thank you all. I see one here today. Fleur, where have you got to? But the few at Meraki looked after June. With sadness, we committed her to Harbour View for the final year, much against her will. But she had become a danger to herself, and so sad to see her going downhill during those final months. The care she received at Harbour View was beyond reproach, and again, thank you to Harbour View. On behalf of June's brothers and sisters, I must express a special thanks to Phyllis, Carmen, especially Amber, for the care you have shown June on this horrible journey. Now, that was going to be the conclusion, but I must turn 2 pages at once. Bear with me, please. Anyone in a hurry to go home? Anyway, I was going to talk about going to Antarctica. June bullied me into going to the Antarctic with her, it was last century, and we went on a little boat from Bluff, sailed into McMurdo Sound, a week to get there, a week down there, a week to get home. And this was before Antarctica was on the tourist thing that, was the place to go. Great trip, we had a great time. About 2 years later, we went from Ushuaia to and down the Antarctic Peninsula through the Weddell Sea, and same story again. Marvellous trip, small boats, only 20 passengers, and you sort of weren't hassled or anything. Everyone knew everyone. They're Russian boats. I'd sail anywhere with those Russians. Good, they were good. But I think it might have been one of June's highlights, certainly one of mine. We often reminisced about those trips we did down into the Antarctic. Bloody great stuff. Thank you for your tolerance. Cheers, Raina.
Oh, thank you, Roger. That was very detailed and just, yes, gives us such a picture of her very full life. So June touched many lives. How very fortunate we are today to have the input from her close friends and university mates who will share some memories. And so we've got a message from Anne Townsend, who is unable to be here, but somebody's going to read that. Meanwhile, I'll ask Kate Leebody, an old friend, to come and share some memories. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks. Thank you. Kia ora koutou. Good afternoon. Hello to the family. Roger's gone through the years and I will make no effort to accurately sequence our friendship, but I'll reflect on the things that make it lasting and memorable. I remember the first day the Slees came to Hedgehope School. My brother Neil, a friend and classmate of Sid's, and I, and perhaps Barbara, were walking to school. Some of you might remember if you lived within 2 miles of the school, you weren't allowed to catch the school bus. So it passed us every day. We walked. But Cliff stopped to pick us up so we could help integrate Sid, June, Roger into the school. And probably our friendship started from there. We both left our mark on that school. Sorry, I'm just going to I'll have to keep doing that. Why did we leave our mark on the school? I was Dux in 1957, and June was Dux in 1958. So our names are on the board there. And she always thought that her Dux medal was, I must have been in a cheap year because I've got a little bit of gold with silver. Hers is all gold, I think. We had a lot of nicknames at the school. Wonka Ward, Bingy Baines, and I was called after my mother, Katie, because my name is really Jeanette, and I've been known as Kate till this day. And that was the last thing June said to me when I visited her recently. She'd sat there with her eyes closed and not reacting. The staff gave me a cup of tea. I said, thanks for the cuppa, June. She said, that's okay, Katie Kate. The only thing she said, but I knew, she knew, that I was there. It was those days back in Hedgehope when our friendship developed. I don't know, remember the days? Off you go, just be home for tea. They had no idea whether we were swimming in the river, whether we were biking to Spring Hills, or what we were doing. And I have vivid memories of one of those bike rides. We were going to see a friend over Dakeaway, and there were a lot of hills. We had it. We were puffed. And I said, F the hills. And June said, now that's a good idea. We could have a little Hillman, and then we could climb in it and we could drive. That was her wit, you know. So at that time, a very quick wit. We spent quite a lot of time at one another's houses. With such a big family, the Slee's house was always interesting. She'd sneak into Marion and Rosemary's drawers, or drawers as in cupboards, I mean. One of you kept a diary. I can't remember too much, but we used to get another episode every now and again. Over that time in Hedgehope, we had family holidays in Riverton, staying at Pearson's crib. The Hortons were there as well. Once again, lots of swimming, Taramia Bay, Riverton Rocks, dragging the flounder net around Back Beach, a great time. I also spent time at Buckingham's at Quarry Hills with June. She loved catching up on her mother's history, and spending time with cousins. And Auntie Nellie kept us on the straight and narrow. And then June and I spent time at Nokamai with the Paget family, and one of the girls is over here. We went with them to help out with the girls, sleep in the tents with them, entertain them, taking them walking or swimming. June often commented on the fact that I nearly drowned her there. We were floating on our backs in the river, drifting along with the current, and I said, "Feel that." I meant the current, but she thought I meant the bottom. And things went a bit astray, and she never really let me forget that. Hitchhope gave us both a sense of community and responsibility. Probably our mothers modelled this: school committees, flower shows, women's division. Oh, incidentally, June and I were both Sunday school teachers as well. Someone may well have an old Hitchhope church pew with our names inscribed in it. I remember sitting up the back and scratching into the pew at different times. We both attended James Hargis High School a year apart, and though we had our own set of friends, we intermingled and became each other's friends. I left school and went to Christchurch Teachers College to become a maths science teacher. June left school next year to work at a bank. I still smile at the thought of June working in that environment. She transferred to Christchurch. It was there she flattered with Karen and Irene and I. She used to leave sometimes before me while I was still in bed to go to work. She'd go on the bus. She'd sneak into my room to get some change out of the change jar. I found a way to keep her out there. Put a few cigarette butts in Rosemary. She hated cigarettes with a passion. She soon woke me up, though, with her shouting about it. I remember another bus incident where the pair of us were on the bus and we just got on and the bus had just got going. Everybody was quiet. Then there was this: "Over 4 million people in New Zealand, you've got to pick my bloody toe to stand on." I wonder who that was. June started on her educational and academic journey at that time. Another relationship with mutual friends, Sharon Mackenzie, and the family developed. Again, intertwining. We went our separate ways. I started my teaching career and ended up back in Southland a few years later, as did she. I had my son Joss at the time, and she was very good to him and continued to be supportive of both me and my sons over the years. You will all know that June always liked the proper form of address. I'll bet your nieces and nephews all called her auntie. And some of you may have been reprimanded recently for calling her Miss Slee and not Dr. Slee. She liked that. There was a problem with my sons, though. They couldn't call her June, that wouldn't be done, or auntie, because she wasn't their auntie. Miss Slee was a bit formal, and they're both a little bit brown, you might notice. So she decided that they should call her Honky. So she insisted for quite some time. White Honky if he wanted to, but Honky. So they knew her. In young days, they had to call her Honky. Her choice, her humour. I worked in Gore most of my teaching career, and after June had gone back to her special education training later, she came to Gore High School as well, where she started her journey in the special and behavioural education. She was supportive of me, looking after Joss when Shay was born. I'm not sure if it's coincidental that Joss went into behavioural and supportive learning and is still doing that now. It was not long after that, as Roger said, her Australian venture began. Helen Miller, another Southlander, worked with June in Australia and asked me to say what an instructive and charismatic supervisor she was, and the group of teachers, her behaviour team, were held in high esteem in New South Wales. So that was very good. So, and Roger has alluded to her ongoing interest in the convict boys and the Nisbet when she was doing her doctorate thesis. A lot of travel. She stayed with a special friend of ours, Frances Allbell, from Invercargill as well, in London. I met her in Milton Keynes at one time with a mutual friend, Daria Croker, nee Hanning, whose parents were also Southlanders, Pat and Winnis. Daria texted me on the way here today, so she's still in Milton Keynes. Shay and I did visit her in Patonga, was it? And of course we kept contact over all those years. She returned to New Zealand often. When she arrived back at Kurau, we resumed, obviously, our support of friendship. I convalesced at her house when I had a hip replacement. She stayed with me in Dunedin when she was needed. She had Christmas with us sometimes. I had Christmas with her. Her continued interest in my boys and their families, and her approval of my boys' partners, which she told me quite often, was genuine and appreciated. We spent pleasant times at Meraki. I know all the family will miss her, or actually have missed her in all those phone calls for over the last couple of years. Roger, you've been her buddy and brother for so long and shared so many ventures with her, and thank you for that. Goodbye, June. Your achievements are formidable, but it's with love and thanks that I say goodbye to my dearest and bestest friend. Can I ask you to go down the stairs? Sorry.
Now, I'd like to call upon Janie Oldfield and Mark Oldfield.
Just got
Eh?
married.
What's that? Do you want to explain? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'm Mark Oldfield, and I haven't gone down on one knee to Janie as yet, so it's Janie Anea. And I'm been asked to read also a tribute from Anne Townend, who was a Waimate District Councillor, and Janie, of course, was the Mayor of Timaru. So I used to name June, who joined me on the Regional Council, and Janie and Anne the fearsome threesome, because they were very strong in their politics on their respective councils and in the wider Canterbury region. So I'm sure they ganged up on us members of the National Council of Men upon more than one occasion. Anyway, first of all, I'll read Anne's tribute. Anne used to live in the Hook homestead near Waimate, and Paul had a pharmacy in Waimate as well. So this is from Anne. June loved books, words, researching and stories, and had plenty of colourful words at her instant disposal to describe multiple people and situations and experiences. June has written into the books of all our individual lives, and we into hers. So in essence, altogether, we are a huge library under the category of Dr. June Frances Slee. June would love knowing that. She gifted me a copy of her book, Crime, Punishment and Redemption, A Convict's Story. Her inscription read, "To a true friend, dear Anne, with love, June, 29th of August 2014. Today I return this small dedication from my book of life in which June has monumentally contributed. To a true friend, dear June, with love, Anne, 21st of November 2025. Rest in peace." Now, from me. June joined me in 2004 on the Canterbury Regional Council, Environment Canterbury Ecan, or perhaps Econ, or other names by some. I well remember her arrival and the discussion over name displays around the council table. We had Sir Kerry Burke as chairman, and June insisted quite rightly that her name was Dr. June Slee and should be displayed as such. The chair's pedigree was in serious doubt when some resistance ensued. June's name was displayed as Dr. June Slee. The so-called glass ceiling was shattered on that day one. For some reason, I started humming to myself, "June, June is busting out all over," from the musical Carousel. June was very well read and educated, as all can attest. Woe betide any councillor who started pontificating on a topic and hadn't read the accompanying staff reports. She didn't suffer fools quietly and took no prisoners if she or someone else was treated badly. She did so cleverly and subtly with resort to her wide and colourful language resources. We shared council work between us as the two councillors representing the area from the Rangitata River to the Waiteki River and inland to Araki Mount Cook. June became something of a legend in Federated Farmers circles when she chaired a meeting with Sir Kerry Burke in attendance. She was a bit nervous and she said, "Well, I don't know about all those crusty old farmers and what reception she would get." I said she would be fine, and after all, she had her brother's training to toughen her up. Anyway, she introduced Sir Kerry Burke, sitting right beside her, as Sir Curly Beak. The subconscious must have been working overtime. As you can imagine, it brought the house down. I really enjoyed working with June on the council. Her intelligence, wit, humour, and her uncanny way of reading people always impressed. She was a great councillor and travelled thousands of kilometres to Christchurch and meeting with constituents in days when councillors actually engaged with constituents. At one stage, she even flew from Oamaru Airport to Christchurch. Indicates the distance and the miles that she travelled. She, like me, didn't relish the MMP-like council environment with the aligned petty politics fighting for the southern region. Indeed, we both favoured a unitary council called Araki. June called a meeting at the Waiteki Bridge Hall after she had departed Ecan, which was filled to overflowing to discuss this. However, we decided that mayors and chief executives, like turkeys, are unlikely to call for an early Christmas anytime soon. At a memorable birthday party of June's at her beloved Otakaik, I crowned her and adorned her with a sash, proclaiming her Miss Araki. So very appropriate as she went on to represent the Arihuri ward on the Waiteki District Council. We were friends for over 20 years. I always enjoyed her travel tales, stories about Rewe Ellen, Sydney, Darwin, though she took great delight in laughing at my phobia of crocodiles, just saying, "Oh, we've got plenty of salties beside the apartment I live in," and visiting her at Otakaik, Lincoln and Meraki, where she and I munched on crayfish in the sun at the fishwife on the wharf. She spoke very fondly of you, Fleur, as well, and only regrets that we couldn't go to your restaurant. I will miss my good friend June, enjoying her rich tapestry of life, filled with adventure, love and laughter. Her scholarly endeavours live on through her books, and she lives on in our memories. A fond farewell, June. You are a beauty inside and out. I believe she stood against Brian Tallboys once when she was younger, in the, not sure what it's called, the Wallace electorate, which she represented for a long time, or in Invercargill. But I can't understand why she didn't win if she looked like that. So you were a beauty inside and out. Rest in peace, June.
Oh, thank you. And
Thank you. Hi everyone, so lovely to be here with you all this afternoon. June and I have been friends for 21 years, and I have to tell you the funniest story about how we met. I think Roger knows this one. But when she was deciding to stand for ECAN, the rural women had a kind of a get-together in Timaru, and it was pouring with rain and sleet and snow. And I was standing for mayor at that time, but I had been a councillor for 9 years before that. And so I was kind of a bit reluctant to go out on the Sunday because the weather was so appalling. But I wanted to support the rural women and I wanted to support women, but I had a whole lot of reading to do for the next council meeting. So I thought, well, I'll kill two birds with one stone and I'll just sit at the back with my agenda and have be there in presence and kind of half listen to what's going on and read my agenda. Anyway, it'd probably been going about 10 minutes and this older lady shuffled in beside me and she had a big coat on and she had snow on her shoulders, and I kind of gave her a glance and I noticed she had really cool earrings, and then I gave her a wee smile and then I just kind of turned away and went back to my agenda. Well, I had one ear listening to the lady who was just starting to present to us, and she was a councillor from Ashburton. And she stood up there and she said, now, ladies, it is most important that you keep your femininity. I would suggest that you always wear a dress or a skirt. And I thought to myself, oh my God, what planet is she on? And then I heard this rather loud voice beside me go, well, I'm effed then. And I thought to myself, yeah, this lady is probably a little bit more interesting than I would have first given her credit for, apart from her cool earrings. And so afterwards, we got together and laughed about this femininity thing in this day and age. And we became firm friends from that moment on. That was 21 years ago. And I became mayor and she became a councillor for ECAN. So, that rural women's meeting was very, very successful in hindsight. And June and I used to meet often for coffee. And as she was getting older, she'd start because I was a bit younger than her, she'd start talking about how, she was getting older and blah, blah, blah. And I remember one day I said, June Slee. Yes, Janie? You're boring the hell out of me. And she looked at me, because June never bored anyone because of, her incredible wit and sparkling intelligence and naughty stories. I said, I love you because you're funny and feisty and naughty and irreverent. I said, you started to talk like a blooming old lady. And she just went like this. She went, oh my God, I needed that. And she never, ever did that again. And that was our wee thing, To me, there was no difference in our age because it was just good friends having fun together. So anyway, I just wanted to share that wee story with you because she's such a special person. And she was so good at keeping in touch. She was even better than I am because I'm not that great, but she was brilliant. But occasionally she'd call me and I'd look at my watch and think, have I got an hour and a half? But look, you're all here because you love her, and I loved her too. And she's very, very special. And often when I was going down to see my mum, I'd stop and see her at the rest home. And, she always recognised me. Always. Might not have much to say, but certainly did know I was there. So that was wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks.
oh, wow, thank you very much. You almost wonder how June fitted all this into her life, don't you? It's just extraordinary. And now we've got a video from Alison Elliott.
Hello everyone, my name's Alison Elliott. I'm one of June's Australian friends of some 35 years, and I'm sorry I can't be here today. Some of you are June's family who she loves so much. Her sisters, her brothers, her partners, the in-laws and outlaws, her nieces, nephews, great-nieces, nephews, long-time New Zealand friends, some of whom have known June since preschool, school and later college, various house share and travel adventures, and from June's more recent work roles. Since I've known June, I've also got to know some of her family, and over the years I've met her brothers and sisters, their partners and other family members, and I think particularly fondly of Amber and Patrick, who've been so amazing to June in the last few years, and especially the last few months. June also had another life in Australia, and many of you won't know so much about that. I met June when she first moved from Tasmania to Sydney for an academic job at the University of Western Sydney. June had travelled the world in the 1960s and 70s at a time when you could travel to places safely, like Afghanistan, Pakistan, Egypt, Morocco. June had endless wonderful travel stories and wrote a lot of travel articles in the day. She'd worked in a range of jobs, including breakfast cook in Scotland and in the most notorious pub in Alice Springs. In Sydney, June was with the Department of Education as an itinerant special education support teacher, and she made many lifelong friends during that time, including her special friend Pete McKenzie, who was her first boss, and his wife Vicky. June was so sad when Pete died a few years ago. Given the stories of their adventures in the western suburbs, I am surprised they ever got any work done, and let alone keep children out of jail. During her years with the Department of Education, June completed her PhD at Macquarie University, where amongst other things she examined the roles and experiences of boy convicts who were transported to Norfolk Island and Tasmania. June's university research and teaching was broadly related to her PhD work. In 2014, June wrote that highly regarded book, Crime, Punishment and Redemption, a convict story, based on the diaries of the convict boy, John Ward, and another book she wrote, Hang in There Till Easter, Managing Classroom Behaviour by Building Resilient Teachers, was very successful in university teacher education programs. June and I bonded soon after she arrived at Western Sydney University over our love of dogs, Australian cattle dogs, biographies about 19th century women, and a love-hate relationship with the royals. You can probably imagine what June thought of Megan, that trollop. And of course, June predicted she would be destined to follow the path of the Duchess of Windsor, and how right she was. I'm not sure what she thought about Tasmanian Mary becoming Queen of Denmark in January 24. June always said she'd be back in Tassie picking apples, and the closest she'd get to the throne was Queen of the Hobart Apple Festival. June and I both had excellent libraries of biographies, and along with another friend, Catherine Wilkin, shared and discussed our books, our reading, gave each other biographies for presents, and were always on the lookout for new or old or no longer published editions, and we loved Slightly Foxed. After living in Rydalmere, Sydney, for a couple of years, June had the cutest house on Patonga, bought the cutest house where my daughter and I often visited, and Juliet, my daughter, reminded me recently of the times when she'd be sleeping on the sofa bed and June's dog would be growling at her every time she dared to move on the bed. That same dog, I know, also stole somebody's dentures one day. Maybe that person's here today. June was an extremely witty person and told a great story. I imagine everyone here has heard June's stories. She could easily keep a room entertained and often had us in fits of laughter. Her wit was especially useful in her teaching, and particularly one trip we did in outback New South Wales, Queensland and the Northern Territory, where she had to work a lot with Aboriginal people, and she kept them entertained for hours when all they were really interested in doing was going shopping. Roger was with us for part of that outback adventure. We went ballooning in Alice Springs, I recall. June managed to repeat the entertainment value of her teaching right around the outback over many, many months in that particular trip. Another thing very witty about June, she had names for people who she didn't like or thought vacuous. Shipping News jumps out at me clearly, the Dwarf, Barney Rubble, the Feather Duster, the Tooth Fairy, and many others. And I laugh every time I think of these names and the people whose real names I've long forgotten. And once we wrote a book together about teaching, where all the cases were named after our dogs, or friends' dogs, or every dog we'd ever known, in fact. There are so many stories about June and dogs. When June got a new puppy once, after she and Roger had been out to Trangie, although it's hard to know why anyone would go to Trangie, certainly not on most people's bucket list, she took the puppy to work in her office, where she had a team of security guards rostered to look after it. June could get the most unlikely people to help her look after, do anything really. Once when she was staying in my house in Sydney, she was on a New Zealand biosecurity committee. She had her travel case open beside the door, and my dog Bessie and Misty were sniffing around it. And then luckily June did a final pack before going to the airport, because as she arranged some of the items in the case, there she found a big, juicy, meaty lamb bone that the dogs had buried in her case. Imagine the scene if she'd arrived at Christchurch Airport with that. June came back to New Zealand for a few years in the early 2000s to her lovely house in Kurau, where I know she made many friends during that time, living in the community and working in the area. She also left behind many friends in Australia, and she had a big ticket to leave party for her Australian friends. And for those who know something of Australian convict history, the ticket to leave is significant. Back in New Zealand, June connected with old friends and family. She was passionate about her family, her friends, her community, and her work roles. Unfortunately, June's most recent move to Moraki, to that lovely house on the water, didn't last as long as she hoped. But she loved the water and always wanted to live by the water. It was a wonderful final home with Biddy, who's now with Amber and Patrick. June and I had a few major trips together and many small ones. About 15 years ago, a group of us went to the UK and Italy for about 4 or 5 weeks. My father, June, my dear friend Kate. June had a few mobility issues, so I thought navigating the airports would be less stressful if we took advantage of the wheelchair service that airlines provide. Of course, I didn't dare tell June that the mobility support was for her, but said it was for my father. June and my father were great friends because they both lived in Darwin for a period. We ended up in one of those amazing people movers that carried us from place to place through the huge airports of Heathrow and Milan. Brilliant, and I can definitely recommend the wheelchair service. Another big trip we did with friends was a cruise from Singapore to Southampton in the UK. In about 2018, I think, we visited a range of places in India and the Middle East where boats used to stop before airline travel, went through the Suez Canal, which was exciting. Later, we spent a week or so in England before each going off to do our own thing. And a highlight of this trip was visiting Highclere Castle, which was the home of Downton Abbey, which we both loved, and many other people did, of course, too. June's years living in Darwin between about 2007 and 2012 or 13 were an amazing time for all of us. We had the best time. Most of us who were there were toward the end of our career and moved to the Territory for an adventure, and we certainly had that. I first came here to Darwin in about 2007 and encouraged 2 of my closest friends, June and Catherine, to move to Darwin. I already knew people and had lots of friends there, and so we had a very strong friendship group that June was able to move into. We all worked hard and we all played hard too. There's great weather, socialising was easy, and when it was cold and dark in Sydney or New Zealand in the depth of winter, we had endless sun and 30-degree temperatures. We did so many fun things in Darwin. Dinner 3 or 4 times a week, lots of local activities, quick visits to Asia. June wouldn't go to Bali because she hated Indonesia for some reason I can't remember. Adventures in remote communities, the Garn to Alice Springs, and so much more. June never liked the heat, and Midgie so, and she certainly let everybody know. When June finally left Darwin, she and Phyllis had a road trip adventure, driving from Darwin to Sydney via Coober Pedy in June's car, which she then shipped to New Zealand. As our dear friend Brenda said when she heard of June's death, "What a woman, and a force to be reckoned with. She was kind, generous, intelligent, opinionated, loyal, and extremely interesting. I thank you for introducing me to June. My 5 years in the Territory were made all the better because of our friends and my friendship with June." So, on behalf of all June's Australian friends, farewell, happy travels wherever you're off to, and we're sure you'll continue to keep everyone honest and entertained. Thank you.
What a full life that woman June's had. Now we've got the lovely Amber, June's niece, who we've heard about along the way.
I'm June's niece Amber, and it's a privilege today to speak as one of her many nieces and nephews. Auntie June wasn't just our auntie, she was Auntie June to all of my friends, to her great nieces and nephews, and many, many more. As she didn't have any children of her own, she really took great interest and was very much involved with all of us in different ways over the years. She was an integral part of the Slee family, usually being the main organiser of the numerous family reunions and get-togethers over the years. Being the middle of 7, she was without doubt the bossiest and made sure she was the centre of attention. She was immensely proud of her large family. When we were kids, she would often ask, "Who would like to rub my feet?" Slim shot out the door before she finished the sentence, and it was usually me that ended up giving her a foot massage. I was rubbing her feet even on the day she died. She took Slim, Charmaine and I on holiday over Arthur's Pass and down the west coast one time. We were about 9 and 10 years old. Several times a day she reminded us what a good auntie she was. We knew better than to disagree. But she was right, she was a good auntie to us. Over the years, she would often tell me snippets of stories of her world travels. It fascinated me that she travelled all over the world with nothing but a small carry-on bag. Of the many countries she went to, one was Israel, where she worked on a kibbutz in the 60s, which very much inspired me. I ended up travelling to Israel and worked on a moshav at the end of 92 and managed to pick up a husband for myself. Auntie June wasn't religious at all, but once she told me a story about when she was in Iran. She went to the toilet, which was just a hole in the ground, and unfortunately dropped her passport out of her pocket into the hole. She had to fish it out and try and clean it as best as possible. There probably was no running water. Later that day, she was crossing the border from Iran into Turkey. The border guard was giving her a hard time. He examined her passport slowly, glaring at her, and each time he turned the page, he licked his finger. She had a smile on her face, and she told me that's when she realised there is a God. I once asked Auntie June if she would write a book about her travels, as her stories were fascinating, but she told me she would have to wait until her sisters died. She was a master of the English language and also a master of exaggeration. She told me once that she was in London and her knees were giving her a lot of trouble with pain. It was before she had both knees replaced. So she went into Boots Pharmacy and asked for some strong painkillers. The pharmacist handed her the painkillers and said that they must not be taken on an empty stomach. Auntie leaned across the counter and said, "Listen, lady, I haven't had an empty stomach since 1964. When I went tramping up the back of Lake Monowai with Crumpy." Patrick and I once went to Sydney with our two older girls when they were really little to stay with Auntie June. Our luggage didn't arrive. Auntie picked us up, took us to her place in Patonga and immediately phoned Qantas. "Is Dr. June Slee speaking?" Within a couple of hours, a bag of Qantas clothes appeared at the door along with $400. She absolutely loved the opportunities that Dr. Slee provided. There are many stories I could tell you, some that are not suitable for public sharing, but I do want to talk about the last year and a half of her life. It wasn't clear to us that Auntie was developing dementia. Slim and Janina would often go down to Meraki and help her out, and we would pop in to see her at Meraki on our way to Dunedin, or I would meet her in Oamaru for a coffee and a catch-up. She'd sometimes say things that were a bit out of character, but we didn't think too much of it. It was her longtime friend Alison who first recognised the signs after staying with her for 4 nights. That time together gave Alison a clear picture of what was happening. So Mum and I began to take turns to stay with her a couple of nights each week through the winter of last year. She was showing strange behaviours and saying unusual things that made it clear something was wrong. If anyone suggested she might be mistaken about something, she'd shoot back, "What would you know? I have a PhD." We began the process of having her diagnosed and assessed, which was no easy task. She was still as cunning as an old rat, as Dad would say. When the needs assessor arrived, she asked what she should call her. "Professor Slee," Auntie said, and within a couple of minutes she ordered her to get her bag and get out of my house. Meanwhile, between our stays with her, the staff at Meraki Tavern very kindly delivered a meal to her each evening. This was a good way for her to be checked on quickly too. It was not something they would normally offer, so we are super grateful to them for making an exception. Auntie loved her place at Meraki, and the community were very kind to her, especially Fleur, Cliff and Di Medlicott, plus of course Kat and Will at the tavern and many others. Eventually Auntie's friend Phyllis had gone to see her and found she had fallen and couldn't get up. This was the final decision point and she had to go into care as she could no longer live on her own. Getting her into an aged care facility with a dementia unit was not easy. We had settled on Harbourview Rest Home. Luckily, there was a room left which had a huge window overlooking Oamaru Harbour. It was a lovely view. We had to trick her, unfortunately, for her own safety. Mum and I carried out a carefully planned operation. I picked her and her little dog Biddy up and took Auntie out to lunch in Oamaru. Meanwhile, Mum was waiting up the road, and as we left, I texted her to say the coast was clear. She swooped in and hurriedly packed a couple of bags of her clothes, bedding, books and pictures. I had called Auntie's current favourite nephew, Mark Slee, to ask him to come and give us a hand getting her into Harbourview. Thankfully, Mark came down from Hines and Mum and he hurriedly set up her room. After lunch, I drove Auntie to Harbourview, absolutely dreading it. But Mark was waiting and she was delighted to see him. He expertly coaxed her out of the vehicle and into her room, with Auntie not suspecting anything. I think if it was even a month earlier, she would have put up a fight. That's how fast the dementia was progressing. On the way in, one of the nurses asked her what her little dog's name is. "That's not my dog," she said. Biddy came home with me and has become a much-loved member of our family. Thankfully, it was a lot easier than I thought to get Auntie into the rest home. The staff at Harbourview are excellent. They are kind, sweet and patient. True to form, Auntie often swore at them. That part of her didn't change. I would apologise for the colourful language they received, but they happily said, Don't worry, we know June's having a good day if she's swearing at us. She was at Harbourview for just over a year, going there in September last year. On Christmas Day, she ended up in hospital with a chest infection. After that, she seemed to go downhill rapidly, both mentally and physically. I would pop in to see her most weeks on my trip to Oamaru, and some days she was quite coherent. Other days she made no sense at all. She was always happy to see me, thankfully. Her face would light up when she saw me. Over the last few weeks, it was becoming more and more sad to see her in this state, just a shadow of her former self, barely able to walk or talk. On Friday last week, I met with her doctor in her room, and even though she was only hours from passing away, she opened her eyes when she heard my voice and tried to mumble something to me. The nurse said that she hadn't seen her do that all day. Only 5 hours later, she was gone. I want to thank the people that went to see her in Harbourview, which was many, but especially Phyllis, who visited her frequently. Also, of course, the staff at Harbourview, who have all been exceptional. Thank you to Mum, and thank you to Dad for all the liaising over the last year and a half. There have been many phone calls and long drives for Dad and Karen coming down from Takaka. It's truly been a privilege and an honour to have this time with Auntie June at the end of her life. We can safely say no one else had an auntie like June. She could be difficult, yes, but she was also remarkable. Her life was full of outstanding achievements. It was colourful, interesting, and absolutely unforgettable. She had a wicked sense of humour. She left an impression on everyone she met. She was one of a kind, and I'm going to miss her.
That was beautiful, Amber. Very realistic and sad, but beautifully covered. At the conclusion of today's service, we'll place some rosemary beside June's ashes and move out to the Stringer Lounge for a cuppa. We will now take a few minutes to reflect on June's life through a collection of treasured photos. I would like to thank the 5 people who spoke so eloquently of June's life, and between that and these photos, we've certainly had the most wonderful overview, haven't we? Today has been a celebration of June's life, and it must be honoured and valued for all that she's worked hard at and been involved in over the years. She's been a strong, determined, capable and intelligent lady with a huge desire to give of herself to help others. It is good to be reminded here just how a character of being strong-willed and strong-minded stood her in very good stead for her chosen life path. We will remember with fondness a warm, kind, feisty lady who cared about others, enjoyed life, and being busy amongst other things with her reading, writing, and yet another book. If we can each take away something today from the way June lived, if we can learn from her experiences and values, if we can try and live more fully for having known her, then this will give continuing purpose to her life and will be a living memorial. I would now like to ask you to take a minute's silence, please, as we reflect on our farewell to June, and also family members and others who are unable to be here or are not with us anymore. Thank you, Carmen. Distressing time, and we would have loved to hear your voice. I'd like to ask you all to stand, please. To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck what is planted. Today we say our last goodbyes to Dr. June Frances Slee before her journey to her resting place. Be glad that she lived, that you experienced, appreciated and valued this woman and the life that she lived. Commit these relationships and the experiences you shared to your memories. Dear June, everything you have done is still done. Everyone you loved is still loved. Everything we've learnt from you is still learnt. And so we will let you pass from this world for which you did so much, for which you continue to do, because when we walk this earth, we walk it with you. You leave us with the strength and pride to do what is good and right, and your memory will guide us just as it did when you were by our side. June, in gratitude for her life and the privilege of life and sharing it, tenderly and reverently, we return her body to the elements from which it came. June, your life we honour, your departure we accept, your memory we cherish, in grief at your death, but in gratitude for your life and the privilege of sharing it with you. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Rest now at the end of your days. Rest in the hearts and minds of all you love and who love you. May you all find comfort and support in your love for one another, and may you find peace in your hearts.
Thank you.